Is this Lamar Jackson smash season? A big-time secondary receiver is emerging in Cincinnati, and another rookie wide receiver is starting to smash. This is Redraft in 5. No introductions. We're here to help you win. Coop, talk to us about what's going on with these Cincinnati wide receivers. Everybody's talking about Ja'Marr Chase, but there's more to the story than that.
Yeah, I'm telling you, man. And I noticed this in the rankings. Anytime you have these guys that kind of hold out, they start slow, people are hesitant to move them up, right? So Chase, obviously at the very top. T. Higgins, people were ranking him in the wide receiver 3 spot, even going into this week. But the reality is that this guy is playing essentially the entire game across from Ja'Marr Chase. Andre Yosevas is on the back burner. The tight ends are rotating, making them inconsistent. Eric All's in line. Mike Gesicki's only playing slot, running routes. It's 2 guys at the top, just like we expected. And coming to this week, T. Higgins was so close to making the big play, not quite making it. And this is such a small sample size game that he was eventually due for that. And this week we saw it. 13 targets, 2 touchdowns. Obviously, Ja'Marr Chase came back, scored 2 touchdowns of his own to overshadow him a little bit. But this is the high consolidation that we look for, that we got in years past from these other teams that are basically just focusing on the top 2 dogs, right? Like, this is what Tyreek Hill and Jalen Waddle was supposed to be. This is what Tank Dell and Nico Collins was last year when they were both healthy. This is exactly what we want. A team to sit here and say, hey, we have 2 studs. We're going to feed our 2 studs. We're going to beat you that way. That's exactly what I want. So T. Higgins right now, if you can still get some sort of discount on him after this week, I'm not sure. But if you can, Theo, I think you got to try.
Yeah, and I completely agree with you. And the thing about T. Higgins is we were always sort of pounding the table and wanting more in terms of the total targets. And like you said, they're really just embracing the personnel that they have there. So this is actually a super, super exciting dynamic. We love target consolidation. It makes our game super easy. And Coop, the shocking thing for me is that Ja'Marr Chase, even with the 12 targets he had yesterday in his insane smash game, he's still being out-targeted by T. Higgins since T. Higgins' return from injury. So T. Higgins has 24 targets the last 2 weeks. Without looking at his stats, this is a extremely rare phenomenon for T. Higgins to see this sort of target total over a 2-week period. I think this is actually a thing. And Cincinnati is putting up big-time numbers right now. So, like Cincinnati, there's obviously frustration. They lose another close one. They lost the close one to Kansas City. They lost the close one to Washington. They lose another close one to Baltimore. But there is still a ton of positivity with what's going on offensively. And for us in fantasy, it's an amazing thing because they have a defense that's letting everybody score, and they're creating this incredible game flow for us. I think you're absolutely right. T. Higgins, you got to see if somebody thinks they're selling high. And certainly 29 points is not going to happen again for T. Higgins, but Coop, it's absolutely a beautiful thing. And for me, my big takeaway this week is it's another season of Lamar Jackson. And the past 2 weeks, it's sort of like Lamar gets a little bit, not sort of overrated. It's still Lamar Jackson, but he is not the center of attention when it comes to what we saw with Derrick Henry in their wins over Buffalo, their wins over Dallas. Derrick Henry was absolutely insane those 2 games, and all credit goes to him. Derrick Henry has another really, really big game, but Lamar Jackson yesterday has 4 passing touchdowns. Incredible stuff from Lamar. Passes for 348 yards, basically goes toe-to-toe with Joe Burrow as a passer, still has 55 rushing yards. And Lamar Jackson right now, efficiency-wise, we've never seen it better in his career. Like last year, he was super efficient. This year, it's insane. It's 9 touchdown passes, 1 interception, and you also have him with the most rushing yardage of any quarterback in football. And this week, he actually goes up against number 2. Jaden Daniels has 300 rushing yards, but Lamar has 363 rushing yards. So it's like he's giving you the Lamar Jackson rushing production, and he's also giving you this insane efficiency as a passer. This is Todd Monken year 2. Not enough credit goes to Todd Monken, but Todd Monken, if you think about what he's dealing with, like this offense has completely changed. Mark Andrews is completely disappeared. Right. And if I told you that Mark Andrews was going to disappear off the earth, you probably would think that Baltimore would take a step back. This guy's been able to integrate Derrick Henry. He's been able to use Zay Flowers at times. He's used 3 tight ends yesterday. And the one constant is Lamar Jackson. Lamar Jackson is just playing exceptional football. And Coop, a lot of leagues, he was going off the board as the QB4. We drafted him together in a league, and we got him at this like insane value that draft. I think somebody might have taken CJ Stroud before him in the draft that we drafted in. So like we ran pure right there. But like Lamar Jackson, it's just the guy. What more can we say?
He's awesome. And that's the thing, is that there's still like purists out there, or as I like to call them, idiots, that want every quarterback to essentially be Tom Brady or Peyton Manning or Drew Brees in terms of statistics, right? And they just want the high completion percentage, and they want them to throw at every single drop back, and they want it to be, quick bang bang accuracy. You can't measure these guys against those guys because they're upping the level of difficulty the way they move the pocket and move around. We talk about it with Kyler Murray and Josh Allen and Jalen Hurts, that like you can't compare their passing stats 1-to-1 because they're adding an entire new level of dynamic movement to the offense, right? So it's like we got to throw that part out the window. Right now, there's really only one quarterback that I saw this week doing that old school style of drop back and huck it, chuck it football, and that was Joe Flacco. I got to talk about Joe Flacco and what he did this week. If you take his passing numbers from the Jets and the Browns, he was attempting 43.5 pass attempts per game, which, again, only Tom Brady in 2022 with 44 was higher than that. He is playing that brand of football, but unlike the Flacco we used to know, he's not turned the ball over. No turnovers through these first couple games. From an actual QB play standpoint, you got to factor in the Lamar Jackson effect that an Anthony Richardson has, where when all is said and done, a mobile quarterback that can run the RPO and throw at a high level and do everything is the better quarterback. Developing Anthony Richardson to be the quarterback of the future and the quarterback prospect is the best thing for this franchise. But at this current moment, in terms of distributing the football for fantasy football purposes, Joe Flacco is a better thrower of the football and distributor of the football than Anthony Richardson. If you were to sit there and ask Anthony Richardson to play the offense the way Flacco did this weekend, it would not look as good. It simply would not look as good because he's not as polished. He doesn't have the pocket awareness and presence that Flacco has. So for the time being, as long as Richardson's out and there's a possibility he continues to stay out, that elevates everybody. It elevates Pittman. It elevates Josh Downs, who we'll talk about in our waiver show after this. So make sure you check that out. It elevates all these guys. It obviously elevates Alec Pierce, who can score a big touchdown at any given time. Right now, Joe Flacco is great for fantasy football. And I have to say, Theo, if you are a Browns fan watching Baker Mayfield, watching Joe Flacco, it's got to be tearing at the heartstrings right now.
Oh my gosh, Browns fans are on like suicide watch. And Kevin Stefanski says he's not going to bench Deshaun Watson. It's sort of like it's like a hostage, like saying like these guys are treating me well and all this kind of stuff. Watching Stefanski there, but like I think you nailed it. This is sort of like from a deeper NFL perspective. Sometimes you'll hear of a team getting rid of like a very solid backup quarterback or having a really terrible backup quarterback, and it's kind of because of this. It's the pressure put on the quarterback in front of them, where Anthony Richardson, like I was over enthusiastic about Anthony Richardson this past offseason in terms of what he could give us. I think you'd hit the nail on the head. His age, him and Caleb Williams are the two youngest quarterback starters in the NFL, and it's really kind of showed. But the completion percentage has just been atrocious for Richardson. And this is one of the things where didn't start quite as many games in college as certain quarterbacks coming in the league, like a Caleb Williams, like a Jaden Daniels, like a Bo Nix. These guys all started so many college games where Richardson, the sample size wasn't quite as large, and things like completion percentage, it's really lacking. Like Richardson had one game with a completion percentage over 50%, and it was the game that he got hurt in. He actually started out really well in that Pittsburgh game. He's like 3 for 4, then gets knocked out. It's atrocious, the completion percentage. And it's a big disconnect with the makeup that they have in Indy. Indy's got these multiple receivers who can get open in Downs and Pittman. And then, like you said, big-time athletes like Pierce and Mitchell. And they did that for Richardson to give him support, but it's really like Flacco just cooks. Flacco played so well last year. Coop, he might do it again. It's really, really, really impressive stuff with Flacco.
Football is like I feel like one of the only jobs where they expect you to come out of college and be the best. Like, it's not like dudes are going to school for accounting and getting hired at Goldman Sachs, and they're like, hey, you know what, man? We heard you're like this phenom. You're going to be our top accountant. You're going to lead the whole department. It's like, it's crazy how we look at this and these like 22, 23-year-old guys and say, why aren't they the best in the league just yet? Why aren't they the best accountant in the world just yet, fresh out of school? You know what I mean? It's go from doing homework to try to be the number one. Like, of course, some of these guys are going to have learning curves. But for me, as a fantasy football guy, I have Anthony Richardson in leagues where I desperately want him back. I have a bunch of leagues where I have Pittman and Downs where I'm like, hey, why don't you take your time?
Completely with you. And I've never seen more fantasy managers get this excited about a backup quarterback than you have with guys like Michael Pittman and Josh Downs, fantasy managers. It's like a completely different viewpoint on these guys. Really, really an interesting dynamic going on with the Indianapolis quarterback position. But you talk about a guy who's super old. So I've got to balance it out with a guy who's super young.
Please.
Brian Thomas Jr., what a player. And I was literally panned on a podcast or two this summer where people are saying, how on earth can I have Brian Thomas Jr. ahead of Ladd McConkey after the NFL draft? And I sort of talked about this sort of scenario, but I didn't think it would happen like this. Brian Thomas Jr. legitimately looks like an NFL star already. He's 21 years old. This is a player who led the nation in touchdown receptions last year at LSU, slightly under the radar because his teammate was Malik Neighbors and his quarterback was Jaden Daniels. But BTJ leads the SEC, leads the nation in touchdown receptions, tears up the NFL Combine, lands on a team that lost Calvin Ridley, and he's basically outperforming Ridley last year. Ridley last year finishes as wide receiver 18 on the year, and BTJ is outperforming him this year. We saw it in week 5 where the targets ticked up. He had 9 targets in week 5, but then the last 2 weeks with Houston and Indianapolis, 2 teams from the AFC South, Thomas Jr. has gone nuts. He's had 21.9 points and 23.2 points. Just the explosiveness that he has, where yesterday he ends up with a career high 122 receiving yards. But Coop, it's sort of like we've been waiting for this sort of a player to emerge. It's sort of like everything you wanted from you referenced T. Higgins, like wanted from T. Higgins heading into year 2, wanted from DK Metcalf at times. You're starting to see from BTJ. And I'll say this, an uncomfortable thing to say. BTJ, the last 3 weeks is sort of looking like we wanted Marvin Harrison Jr. to look every single week. Where Marvin Harrison Jr., it's been a little bit of inconsistency. He's had some tremendous performances, but also sort of the poor usage and performance we saw yesterday. BTJ looks like a guy that is a set it and forget it wide receiver 2 the rest of the season. Your thoughts on him?
Yeah, I mean, well, that's the narrative, right? Is that because of the gold standard of losing your top wide receiver and bringing in another one is the Minnesota Vikings, trading away Stephon Diggs and drafting Justin Jefferson. The talent was there. The opportunity was there. That's the big combination. With some of these guys, like look at Jackson Smith and Jigba, the opportunity wasn't even there because DK Metcalf is there and Tyler Lockett is allergic to getting tackled, so he'll always be there. But when you look around, we had a lot of those opportunities. Stephon Diggs left again, and Keon Coleman had that opportunity. We watched Jonathan Mingo step into a spot where a guy was vacated. In this case, with Calvin Ridley left that role, they asked Brian Thomas Jr. to step in and do it immediately, and he has. So I think now is you got to trade for that guy if you can. If you can in Dynasty, it's tough because the people that draft that guy believe in him and they're seeing it too. That's what makes it hard. But I mean, if you can get these guys, now's the time. Speaking of which, Theo, maybe we should get into some guys we think we should trade for moving forward.
Yeah, absolutely. Who you got this week, Coop?
My player is encapsulated in an entire philosophy, okay? When it comes to trading in fantasy football, collusion is illegal. Cheating is illegal. But there are times where you're helping the other team while you're helping yourself, right? Trading a wide receiver straight up for a running back when you have lots of wide receivers and you need running backs and they are hurting, you're helping both teams, right? This is the rare part of the year, Theo, where the bye weeks have come around. There are teams that are 0-5. There are teams that are 1-5. Somebody might be sitting there with a Cooper Kupp on their team who's hurt, and now that team goes on bye week and they're 1-4 or 0-5, and you're helping that. Cooper Kupp, if you're 0-5 and you lose this week, your season is virtually over. So you're helping that team by taking Cooper Kupp off their hands and giving them someone they can use this week. And make sure you give them someone that makes their team better, especially this week, so that the Vito Burrito police don't come and try and take him away. But look around. Look at the people that have Cooper Kupp, Puka Nacua, Justin Jefferson, Travis Kelce's good. These guys are all going to be on bye this week. They're not helping these teams win right now. Now is the time where you can come in, maybe be a little bit of a robber baron and help that team keep their dream alive while making your team better potentially down the stretch. With guys like Puka Nacua or Tyreek Hill, right? You got to believe in your team carrying it and keeping it afloat for potentially things down the road when Tua gets better or Puka comes back or whatever may happen. If you're going to go that far, but Cooper Kupp, we hear he's going to be back after this week. We know that no one has truly emerged as a top dog there, and he can take that chair right back. Cooper Kupp, if you can kind of pry him away, this is probably your last chance.
Yeah, I think that's a great call. And I think just from a trading game theory perspective, that's an ultimate way to win in fantasy because you get the discount because guys are on bye weeks. You also get desperation kicking in. It's a weekly game. Like you hear all these people telling you to be patient, be patient, be patient. It's easier said than done if your team is 1-4 and then you lose a couple more guys heading into a bye week. So like losing creates desperation in all walks of life and probably more so in fantasy football when those fantasy playoffs are around the corner. Coop, we're already in October. The season is ticking by. I think that's a great way. And I think just from a perspective with Cooper Kupp, it's like the guy was utilized. Like it was incredible utilization. Like
he still leads the team in targets to this day. He hasn't played since week 2.
All the Malik Neighbors usage that we've been talking about on every podcast the last few weeks in terms of target total, in terms of first read look, in terms of how often he gets put in motion. That was literally Cooper Kupp when he was healthy. So it's like he had wide receiver 1 overall usage and goes down. When he comes back, now there's no Puka Nacua. It's a smash one. I love it. Yeah. I'm going to do one. This one might be upsetting to you because I know this is a player that you don't like the player per se, but I think that there's a lot of people out there that are struggling at the tight end position. And since Jake Ferguson has returned from injury, this has been a guy that's been very consistent in terms of his targets and his receptions and his role in the offense. Jake Ferguson has had 6 receptions, 7 receptions, and 6 receptions. This is a player that has 0 touchdowns. But Coop, we saw last year that this is a player that Dak Prescott will target in the red zone. This is a situation and a player that, despite not being like the most talented tight end in football, he's going to give us potentially a top 5 tight end season based on the usage we're seeing, based on the situation, based on the role. Sorry to do this to you. You're my homie. But at the end of the day, Jake Ferguson is somebody who I want on all my redraft rosters.
Yeah, and the thing is, we have to separate the different takes. I think a lot of people think that I hate Jake Ferguson when I don't.
Kind of hate Jake a little.
I didn't like him in Dynasty because this offseason, especially because he's not particularly fast and he needs to get peppered with targets. And I figured that team would go all in, like Jerry Jones said, and bring in pass catchers, bring in running backs. They didn't do any of that, right? So they kept with Brandon Cooks and Jalen Tolbert. Now Brandon Cooks is out, right? So even if it's not like I had him in my fades article this year. I had him in the yin and yang tight end, dude. So a lot of my guys have him too. You draft a safe but boring guy, Jake Ferguson, and then you pair him with an upside guy. Well, none of the upside guys hit. And as we know, a lot of these guys that we thought we could just draft and set and forget, Sam Laporta and Mark Andrews and Kyle Pitts and virtually all the tight ends, well, they're not as set and forget as we thought. So a guy like Jake Ferguson, boy, are you happy to have him. He doesn't have the athletic ability to really explode for crazy yak, but I mean, all you need is something to keep you afloat. So yeah, I'm fully on board with trading for Jake Ferguson. Again, we have to separate preseason takes and dynasty takes and best ball takes from, like you said, playing week to week. And week to week, this guy's locked in.
Yeah, and I think it's also more of like the situation of being the tight end for the Dallas Cowboys tight end. That's a position you're investing in. Like we think about Dalton Schultz, like now you don't even put him in your lineup when he's in Houston this year. But when he was in Dallas, he gave us a tight end 3 overall season and also a top 6 season. So like Dak Prescott is a tight end's best friend. Coop, at Redraft in 5, we talk about players who are going to absolutely smash this week. We're up here. It's week 6. It's a must-win week for some fantasy managers. People want to make some money in DFS. What's a player that everybody can trust to absolutely smoke the competition this week?
Right. And I'll tell you, when you look around at the wide receiver 2 landscape, what differentiates a few of these guys from the wide receiver 3 group is the manufactured touches they get. That's why of all the top 24 wide receivers last year, there was one guy that didn't get 100 targets. That was Deebo Samuel. How did he get there? Well, he had 5 rushing touchdowns. I look around, and a guy like Jaden Reed was already somebody that was getting those manufactured touches. Every week they say, hey, let's just get him a touch and let's see what happens. Let's get the ball in his hands any way we can, whether it's a screen or a handoff or an end around, and let's see what he can do with it. That type of guy was already great. And now with Jordan Love and potentially Romeo Doubs, not sure if he's going to be back, but Christian Watson's definitely out. Dontavian Wicks didn't really step up this week. And when you look at this matchup coming up here against the Arizona Cardinals, man, I just don't know who over there is going to stop Jaden Reed or if they can, man. And I think this guy could easily go out, have a receiving touchdown, a rushing touchdown, just cut him up in a million different ways. So Jaden Reed, dropping the hammer.
I love that one. Jaden Reed, that's a guy that the two of us have been discussing for 2 years now. And we sort of talked about Jaden Reed in the come up. That's a guy where I was recommending him as a waiver wire addition for like a whole first half of last year. And me and you discussed, hey, this kid, Jaden Reed, blah, 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 blah. And then all of a sudden, he wide receiver 10 from the season on. Now the guy is just, he's a wide receiver 1 this year. And he moves different, Coop. He moves different. Like when you watch him, the guy looks so explosive when the ball's in his hands. That deep completion from Jordan Love down to Jaden Reed was maybe the play of the weekend. It was so nasty. It was awesome. And for me, this is one, you brought up Cooper Kupp, and I love that you got me on this mentality because I love backing up players coming off of bye weeks, and A.J. Brown is going to return to an NFL football field this week in week 6. This is a player that gave us a huge week in week 1. He had like 23 points scored in week 1. Now people have forgotten. You're not used to seeing A.J. Brown miss a bunch of time. You also have this narrative that the Cleveland Browns can shut people down like they used to. The Cleveland Browns defense is not getting any help from the offense. That's going to start wearing on them. A.J. Brown coming off of a bye week, first game back from injury, 2 touchdown catches. Last week I said DJ Moore revenge game. This is A.J. Brown reminding you who he is, an alpha outside wide receiver 1 that does things in a major way. When you get an A.J. Brown smash week, you win your week in fantasy. He's going to crush it this week. Coop, we're going to be back soon. Let everybody know where they can find your work.
You can find over at fantasyalarm.com, all my articles, and SiriusXM channel 87. Going to be picking up a few extra shifts coming up this week. So weekdays 6 to 8, Sunday mornings 10 to 11, and of course at the Fantasy Alarm YouTube channel as well. What about you, buddy?
Yeah, so check out all my work over at PlayerProfiler and Fantasy Points. Doing School of Scott now with Scott Barrett every single week in the middle of the week, and then my Waiver Wire show that drops every week over at PlayerProfiler and a bunch of other podcasts. We're just grinding constantly, but big shout out to my guy Coop doing the 6 to 8 time slot on Sirius. Make sure you're checking him out. You're crushing it over there, and we'll be back here redraft in 5. We'll see you next week.